Hello folks, I'm Cooper, and today on Cooking with Cleavers we're talking about the Shibazi P-01, a dual-purpose, a very budget dual-purpose Chinese cleaver. So dual-purpose or all-purpose means that theoretically you can use it as a slicing cleaver and as a chopping cleaver. The knife here is actually labeled as a jianqie dao, which means a chop, slice, knife. So that's what they call it exactly. The markings on the blade are Shibazi Zuo. They have that embossed in, and then they have like a laser cut that you probably can't see on the video that says Shibazi Zuo's website, and that is made from 4CR, 13 MOV, and Jianqie Dao 1. Typically speaking, I am not a fan of dual-purpose cleavers or all-purpose cleavers. The idea that you can chop bones with it towards the heel and slice things with it towards the tip just is not attractive to me, because you can also get a very nice slicing cleaver and a very functional bone cleaver for not very much money. And you'll always be better served in slicing things with a dedicated slicing cleaver, and you will always be better off with a bone cleaver for chopping through bones. The idea of melding it into one sounds nice, but I have not found it to be enjoyable. The reasons for that we'll get into, but generally the blades end up being thicker behind the edge and heavier than their counterparts, so it's less manageable, it's more tiring and stuff like that. So the Shibazi Zuo P-01, this review also will work for the P-02 and P-03. The P-01, P-02, and P-03 are all basically the same designed blade. It differs in the height of the blade and the length of the blade. So the P-01 is the largest of them. Don't get confused between the P0 whatever lineup and the TP0 lineups. The TP03, which is one of my preferred slicing cleavers, which is basically equivalent to the F208, is made with a better quality steel. It's got layered steel, so it has a core steel that's an 8CR13 steel, which is better than the 4CR13 in this knife. Also, for the TP lineups, the different numbers, so you have a TP01, which is a bone cleaver, a TP02, which is a kitchen or taller cleaver, and the TP03, which is a sangdao, which is a shorter height slicing cleaver. And then they've got dashes after that, altering the size. So anyway, Shibazi Zuo's numbering system is all sorts of confusing, but today we're talking about the P-01, and P-02 and P-03 essentially. So as I mentioned before, as a dual-purpose cleaver, they say that you can chop through bones and things at the heel here and slice through things up at the tip. Yeah, you can chop through chicken bones and thin, small bones with this slicing cleaver. Using it as a chopping knife or as the dual-purpose part, using it on chicken bones will result in dinging up the blade eventually, and you will have to sharpen it more often. Also, when you sharpen this blade, Shibazi Zuo recommends that you sharpen it from between a 15 and a 20-degree angle on your whetstones. I would recommend going closer to that 20-degree angle, because this steel is not a particularly it will not hold an edge through chopping through bones and things. Even when you're just chopping through or slicing through things, this will end up getting dulled faster than many knives. And when you have a chopping knife, you don't want an edge that will that's super hard, and usually hard edges will retain the edge better. If you have too hard of an edge, it gets brittle and breaks, so they went with softer metal. It means you have to sharpen it more. Anyway, we'll get into the specifics of this P-01. The P-01 is it has a height of about 100 millimeters. I think I measured mine at like 98 or 99 millimeters, which is like 3 7/8, almost 4 inches tall. The P-02 and P-03 go down in height a few millimeters each from there. The blade length is 208 millimeters, or about 8 1/4 inches. The blade, or the knife, total weighs 375 grams, which is about 13.3 ounces. And then the thickness at the spine, along the spine of this blade, is about 2.1 millimeters across the whole thing. That thickness, if you look at this choil, you can see that the thickness basically it maintains that 2.1 millimeters basically all the way down until this area here where you can see the machining where they thinned it out, and it gets down to about 0.5 millimeters right behind the edge. So comparatively, it's a thick blade. If you look at a nice thin blade like this CCK KF1912, the choil gets very thin down behind the edge, and comparing it to this dual purpose cleaver, it's 2 or 3 times as thick as you get down towards the bottom of that choil view. So it has to maintain that thickness to have enough support behind the blade so that you can do the chopping function of the dual purposeness. The front choil is essentially the same story as the back of the blade. So you could probably use the whole blade to chop things with. There may be, I've heard some people say that there's special treatments towards the rear edge of the blade that make it more robust or something. I highly doubt that is the case, and I bet they just did the same thing for the whole blade across, because this is a stamped steel blade and it's very, very cheap. So we talked about height, weight, length, and spine width. We'll move into the steel quality. So this is made from 4CR13. It says so as much. 4CR13 is a fairly cheap stainless steel. And in this blade, it's not heat treated to very hard. I've heard people say that it's at like a 57 Rockwell rating, which is not that hard. Anyway, with that softer steel and lower quality steel, this knife will get dull quickly, and yeah, it just won't retain an edge very well. So you're going to have to sharpen it more frequently. If this was my dedicated slicing cleaver, I would be very annoyed at that. So if I was trying to use it as a slicing cleaver, I'd just give up and get something better as your dedicated slicing cleaver. It's a more robust edge that will dull quickly. It is easy to sharpen. It probably will not, it will definitely not get as sharp as your nicer slicing cleavers. It's simply thicker behind the edge, so unless you thin out the blade and change it completely, it won't get as sharp. Also, because it's not as hard as steel, it probably won't ever get quite to the pinnacle of high sharpness, even if you didn't factor in that it's a thicker blade there. So anyway, it's not going to get as sharp as many other options. It will still get sharp enough to cut stuff, but yeah, you will get dull very quickly, so sharpen it. Finish and coatings and things. The finish on this, as I said before, is a mirror finish. I don't much care for mirror finishes. When I grabbed some of my carbon steel knives that I had on the rack, like this much larger dual purpose cleaver, or one udal, I come back and grab this, and any of the oil that's residual on the blade from my carbon steel knives, which I oil, or if I grab a wood-handled slicing cleaver, which I also oil with mineral oil, some of that residual oil will end up getting caught on here, and you can see all of your fingerprints and stuff marked up on that blade. So I don't much care for mirror finish blades. It kind of looks cheap to me. And also when you do look at it, there's sort of a weird wavy pattern in the mirror finish on my particular one. So the finish is nothing special. I don't much care for it, but it's a cheap knife, so that's to be expected. The handle on it is a very hollowy metal handle that they weld onto the blade. I don't much care for the handle itself. It feels weird, and it's got this SBZZ embossed on it. It's kind of weird embossing or whatever. Not my favorite handle. Generally, I'd recommend getting a wood-handled knife, or if you need to get a metal-handled knife, get something like the higher-end TP lineup, and it has a comfortable metal handle that doesn't feel so hollowy. This one feels very hollowy and weird, and yeah, don't much care for the handle. In actual performance cutting, it is very noticeably thicker when you're trying to slice through the things. So I for a couple of weeks have used this as my only knife that I go to for everything, and it gets really tiring slicing through carrots and potatoes and those sorts of things, the harder vegetables. It's so thick that it wedges into things, and you have to put a lot of effort to get through things. Also, it's a bit heavier than its contemporary sized knives, and by a bit I mean a lot. So this is a CCK-KF 1912. It's very similar in length, but this is like 120 or 130 grams less because it's got the thinner blade. The TP-03 is actually about the same weight as the P-01, but it's slightly longer and has better balance to it. So this feels much more comfortable to slice through things for a longer period of time, even though it's about the same weight than this one. It just requires a lot of effort to push through stuff with it. So as a slicing knife, not that great. As a chopping knife, also not that great because it's too light and too thin. I'm always afraid that I'm going to ding it up. So I haven't really used it as a chopping knife, and don't really intend to ever use it for that purpose, because I have chopping knives. If you want a chopping knife and a slicing knife, just get a chopping knife and a slicing knife, and you'll be better off with that. Having a nice big piece of metal makes chopping through things much simpler, and I can chop through all sorts of bones with this, whereas you're pretty much limited just to chicken bones with this knife. So that being said, I've established I don't like it as a slicing cleaver, I don't like it as a chopping knife. What is the purpose of this knife? I actually do use this and will continue to use this knife for one distinct purpose, and that is as a cheap beater-upper slicing, or I guess it's not a slicing cleaver, but as a cheap beater-upper cleaver, particularly for fruits with very hard seeds. Like guava. Here in Taiwan, there's plenty of guava to buy at like open air markets and stuff, and I like to throw some of that in some of my smoothies sometimes. But I've noticed that some of the slicing cleavers, edges get dinged up on the seeds in guava. The seeds in guava are incredibly hard, so instead of using my nice knives and dinging up the edges and doling out the nicer knives on those harder seeded fruits, I found that this cheapo cleaver is a solution, and that's basically the only thing I use this dual purpose cleaver for. That's to abuse it, essentially. Because I sharpen it to a 20-degree angle, the edge doesn't get dinged up. Also, because it's a softer steel and a cheaper steel generally, it's actually a little bit more robust than the harder steels in some of the other slicing cleavers. And it works out well for its role of slicing guava, pretty much, and any other fruits or vegetables that have really hard seeds that could be a problem for other thinner slicing cleavers. So that's what I use this slicing cleaver for, or this cleaver for. It's not really a slicing cleaver, it's a dual purpose cleaver. Anyway, that's my basically sole purpose for this cleaver, is a beater upper knife. Unfortunately, here in Taiwan, I was able to get this P-01 for next to nothing. I think it was 300 NTD, which is about 10 US dollars. I've looked on AliExpress at a couple of places, and there's varying prices. Some of them go up to like $50 to get this piece of garbage knife, as I would describe it. Don't waste your money on that. In fact, I wouldn't spend any more than like $20 on this knife. I'd aim for like 10 to 15 maybe, as I said, to use as a beater upper knife. And if you're going to spend $50 on a knife or something, just remember that the better knife, the TP-01, or the TP-03, I mean, is that better knife, or the F208-1, which is the same exact blade as this, but with a wood handle. You can get that on Amazon for like $45. So you may be able to get the nicer knife with the 8CR13 cladded steel for about the same price as you could the P-01 with the cheaper 4CR13 steel. Anyway, so if you can get this cheap at like a market or something, it's an okay knife to use as a beater upper knife, but don't waste your money on this. Again, I probably wouldn't have bought this for any more than $15 or $20. And I don't recommend you do either, because it's not a knife that I use all the time. It's not a knife I enjoy using. And if I'm doing a lot of slicing, always go to a slicing cleaver. If I have to do some chopping, I use a chopping bone cleaver. There's just not much use outside of that beater upper roll for this dual purpose cleaver. Also to note, the packaging of this dual purpose cleaver is a fairly flimsy cardboard box. The packaging for Shibazi, most of them are cardboard boxes, but when I got this knife, the TP-03-1, the box was a more solid cardboard than this P-01 box. As you can see, it's very flimsy, and when I got it, it was smashed up, and in fact the very tip up here, I had to reprofile a bit because it was dinged up significantly. So just be aware that there is potential for damage in travel because they don't package it particularly well. Again, it's a cheap knife, so they don't care. And that's reasonable, I guess. But there you go. That's a review on this P-01. Oh, I forgot about the blade profile. So as you can see, there is a significant gap of air there when you're on the rear flat. There's a short flat in the rear, and it's not really flat up front at all. So as a slicing knife, it's not my preferred slicing blade profile. This is a better slicing knife. You can see there's a good flat that provides more benefit in a slicing motion. It means you don't have to roll back and forth as much as you do on this one. This is not a I have seen other Chinese cleavers that have more belly, so it's not like the worst thing in the world. But, you know, I'm not going to use this as a slicing knife at all, and I don't recommend you do either, so not really a problem there. But there you go. This is the Shibazi P-01. If you're interested in finding it, it probably is only on AliExpress right now. I think they've had some on Amazon before. Presently, I do not believe it is there, but you can Google it and you will be able to find it. It's a mass-produced knife. Also, yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you for watching this episode of Cooking with Cleavers. If you're interested in learning more about Chinese cleavers, more specifically generally Chinese slicing cleavers and some Taiwanese specific knife types, please stay tuned, hit the subscribe and notifications bell. And if you like this video, please like and share. That helps other people find these videos. And my real purpose in doing these videos is to provide more information and education about the cool knives that most people in Western countries don't have any experience with. My goal is to share more about the benefits of Chinese cleavers and the like, and using them in everyday cooking. So if you think there's anyone who might be interested in these knives, share this with them. But thank you for watching, and have a great day.